Few works of 20th century storytelling have had a deeper impact on culture than Fiddler on the Roof. Even more than 60 years after the musical premiered on Broadway, its iconic characters, beloved songs, and unfortunately still relevant message live on in the minds of almost everyone who's ever seen it. And whether you're watching it performed on Broadway or by middle schoolers who barely know their lines, the piece just works. Once the opening violin strains of tradition hit, it's impossible not to find yourself getting deeply emotionally involved in the trials and tribulations of the world's most famous milkman. Not only did the original production run longer than any Broadway show before it, its album also became the first original cast recording to go double platinum. America simply could not get enough of this quirky tale of persecuted Jews in Tsarist Russia. Of course, coming out in 1964, its massive cultural cachet was inconveniently timed just at the last moment when musical theater held that level of mainstream attention, before the Beatles and rock music relegated it to the status of entertainment for squares. When it came time for the inevitable film adaptation in 1971, Hollywood was already deep into its, quote, new phase, which prioritized grittiness and reality over craft and emotionality. How would an America that had already flipped for Bonnie and Clyde and Easy Rider feel about a 3-hour-long, extremely faithful adaptation of a Broadway musical? Well, what do you expect? It's Fiddler on the Roof. They gave it 8 Oscar nominations, it won 3, and became the highest-grossing film of its year. This is often pointed to as an aberration, given the film trends of the time. After all, the signature studio failures that characterized the late 60s were 3-hour musical roadshows too. Why did this one work where Hello Dolly failed? The basic answer is that some things are just too good not to work. The film succeeded then for the same reason it resonates with audiences now. It fills your soul.
Welcome to Kale Your Idols, a new Hollywood podcast with your hosts,
Sam Ludwig
and Elena Gibson. This is a podcast about film. Primarily, we discuss movies, directors, actors, and writers known for their work during the new Hollywood era of studio filmmaking that began in 1967 with Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate, and pretty much ended in the early 80s with One from the Heart and Heaven's Gate. In this episode, we are discussing a beloved favorite of mine, and that is Fiddler on the Roof.
So you like this movie then?
I love this movie. I'm just going to say that right now. I'm not even going to wait for the Cold Stone rating. I'm going to lay all my cards on the table and say I fucking love this movie.
Does fucking love mean it's a gotta have it?
Yeah, I gotta have this movie. Like, it's gonna be a gotta have it. This movie lives in my soul. I know every line of this movie in a visceral level. Like, when I see the numbers happen on screen, I feel them in my body because I've watched them so many times as a child.
Could you do the opening monologue? Because I can.
Okay, well, maybe I don't have as good as a memory as you.
How far could you get? You don't think you could get it? Come on, give it a shot. How far could you get?
Can you give me the first line?
You don't know the first line?
Can you just, throw me a fucking bone here, okay?
Okay, the first line of Fiddler on the Roof is, "A fiddler on the roof."
Sounds crazy, no? I don't have everything memorized. I've got a bad memory, okay? But, like I said, I feel it in my bones. And my memory is not proof of that.
So do you feel like when you watch this movie, do you think you're a little bit unable to be critical of it? Or do you have criticisms that you're maybe excusing or anything like that?
I guess we'll find out throughout the episode. I am the type of person who thinks I'm always able to be critical of something, even when I love it. I don't think that makes me turn a blind eye to things. I don't have a lot of criticisms for the movie, but we'll see if things come up throughout the episode.
Would you say this is like Norman Jewison's masterpiece?
Yeah, I mean, I can't pretend to be super familiar with Norman Jewison yet. Throughout the course of doing this podcast, I certainly will be more familiar with him. But I do think that this movie is a masterpiece.
I think Jewison has a bit of a tendency in his movies to sometimes find making them very boring irresistible. And I think some people would probably say that this movie has some elements of boringness. I don't know. Would you agree?
I actually do have some criticisms, and it's that any scene that does not contain Tevye is boring to me. I find myself twiddling my thumbs for all of the non-Tevye scenes, aside from Matchmaker.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly problems we could discuss with Miracle of Miracles, but I don't know if I would call that boring. I think a lot of the performances in in the movie are actually really good. Like when I was keeping an eye on the daughters, I was like, Seidel is so good in this. Whatever her name is, this random chick who's only in this movie.
I think it's Rosalind Harris.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the acting is good by everybody, well, almost everybody. But it is, as you're kind of alluding to, a square movie in a lot of ways. Like, Norman Jewison is considered a very square director. The thing that makes this movie beloved, in my opinion, really is Topol, the actor who plays Tevye, who's just really sparkling on stage, and just the amazingness of the character of Tevye. Tevye is one of the most beloved characters of all time.
Yeah, and I think that Jewison's problems as a director who is boring aside, the show itself also, even in musical form, is very long. Let's just kind of start talking about this show that this movie is based on and musical theater in general a little bit. So this is like the first episode that we're doing on a film adaptation of a stage musical. We have had several musicals that we've talked about, but they were all written for the screen, right? We talked about Dr. Dolittle and Mary Poppins.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know how much I need to get into the weeds about this, but it kind of is appropriate. So stage musicals are a combination of elements that need to work together. These are lyrics, music, the book, what we call the book, which is the dialogue in between scenes, but also like the book you could consider like the whole story. The book writer is basically creating the characters and creating the world. And the songwriters, who are oftentimes two different people, one person writing the lyrics and one person writing the music, they have to express parts of the book through song. So they're not creating characters, really. I mean, they're collaborating, but the point is they're not the creators of the piece on a whole. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
So you're saying the book writer is the one who really is building the story, and the people who make the music are adding pizzazz.
Well, pizzazz is an interesting thing to bring up because why do most adaptations of stage musicals for the cinema not work? I'm just going to say something is always lost every time you adapt a story told from the stage into a film, and we're going to get into a number of reasons why there's some dampening that happens. I think part of it has to do with in the theater, the songs are songs. And by that, I mean they're trying to tell the story. In the best musicals, this isn't always the case, but they're trying to tell the story through song. And in a movie musical, where they're creating musical sequences for a film, and that's the first time they're conceiving it, those are usually more numbers, where they're sort of like special effects that are not actually trying to advance the story in a movie. They're just kind of like trying to add like a set piece, kind of like think about like it's Jolly Holiday with Mary from Mary Poppins. You know what I mean? That moment doesn't tell you anything other than just let's have fun and look at they're hanging out with cartoons. But so going back to the idea of musicals are a mishmash of elements. It's just most musicals don't really work, in my opinion. This is coming from a person who is obsessed with musical theater and knows the medium very well and has really like actually sat with and listened and examined to a lot of musicals. Most of them just kind of aren't going to work for most people for various reasons. And it's because it's just really hard to maintain a tone across these different elements and make the lyrics match the music, match the book. And then sometimes if you bring in choreography, which sometimes can be an authorial voice, as it was in the musical version of Fiddler, it just becomes incredibly difficult to sustain the tone for every single moment in the show. And even brilliant masterpieces, such as Fiddler on the Roof, they're still almost always plagued with these moments in the show, songs or scenes or whatever, that you're like, that wasn't as good as the rest of the stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Typically, for a musical, when I think of things not being as good, I think of just the song isn't as good. Like the tune isn't as good and the chorus isn't as good.
Yeah, but this is a weird thing to experience in, like, that doesn't really happen in most movies. Like, you're not watching a movie and being like, oh, that scene stuck out like a sore thumb. I'm just going to ignore that. Like, you know.
Who was it that said that, like, a good movie is made up of, like, 3 great scenes? So you think of the great scenes in movies, you don't think of the bad scenes in movies, whereas with musicals you do think of the bad songs because they're grating, they're annoying. Like Pauline Kael in her review of Fiddler on the Roof, she kind of describes Tradition, the opening song, as a little bit gruesome and grating, and how she was relieved that the rest of the songs in the musical didn't have that driving element of tradition. She didn't necessarily say she didn't like it, but that it was unpleasant in a way. So musicals, the songs in them, if they're unpleasant to you in some way, it really is going to affect your experience of watching the movie way more than a bad scene in a movie. So I think you're right about that.
In a movie, like, it all usually is just pretty coherent, and you're not feeling like a jarring sense of being in a different piece, in a different scene, even if the scene isn't as exciting. But, like, there's just like parts of musicals, and a song is long. It's like 5 minutes usually in a piece where you're just kind of like, okay, I'm waiting for this to be over. And it's incredibly difficult for even the best shows to escape without having some clunkers. There were 50 songs written for the original production of Fiddler on the Roof. They discarded so many songs that were just not working, not telling the story. And to point to that grading aspect that Pauline Kael pointed to in Tradition, which, by the way, is insane sounding to me, but I kind of get what she means. Like, the music of Bach and Harnick, who are the composer and lyricist of Fiddler on the Roof, one of the things that I love about it is it's pure storytelling songwriting. They are so much less concerned with trying to write pleasant music in a way.
Can you give me some examples of other Bach and Harnick musicals? Like, can you tell me, like, just a really brief intro about this duo?
Yeah, they're sort of the Beatles of musical theater in a way, in that they burned so bright for about like an 11-year period. And then they broke up as a songwriting team in 1970. Like, they had 30 more years where they could be writing shows. It's really sad. But anyways, so the shows that they wrote together were The Body Beautiful, Fiorello, which already won them a Pulitzer Prize, by the way. And this is a show that is not done very often anymore. And it's kind of just crazy that Fiddler on the Roof wasn't even shortlisted for the Pulitzer. And that has to be because these guys had already won a Pulitzer like 3 years ago, okay? She Loves Me, which is maybe my favorite piece by them, although Fiddler is probably Fiddler still. The Apple Tree, and the Rothschilds was their final show. I'm pretty sure that's all of the Bach and Harnick shows. Every one of these shows is very interesting, very worth talking about. Their work is different in each one. I love them. I consider them to be sort of the second most consistently interesting and successful writers of musical theater other than Stephen Sondheim.
Yeah, it's funny because you listed a lot of relatively obscure musicals just then. Like, not many of them are that well known outside of the realm of musical theater.
But, like, are they more obscure than Sondheim shows?
I think so, but maybe that's just because I'm married to you. So I know Sondheim shows way more than the average person, perhaps, because you know Sondheim way more intimately than the average person. Okay, so Fiddler, you got Bach and Harnick, and then who were the other key players involved again?
Joseph Stein, who wrote the book. He also wrote the screenplay for the movie. And then you have to talk about Jerome Robbins in the development of the musical, which he was not part of the creative team of the film. What do you know about Jerome Robbins?
Really nothing. I mean, he's the choreographer of this, and he also directed Fiddler, the musical. But that's all I know about him.
Not familiar with West Side Story?
Okay, I'm sure I'm familiar with his stuff, but I don't, like, his name doesn't jump out when I think of those things. So yes, I'm very familiar with West Side Story and how specific the choreography is and how cool the choreography is and how that makes up a large part of the show of West Side Story.
Yeah, it's part of the authorship of the show. Like, if you're doing West Side Story, you need it to look a certain way. You need the dances to have a very particular style, or else people are going to be like, what the fuck is this? What am I watching, right?
He's like a Bob Fosse type.
Yes, except as a point of contrast with Bob Fosse, I would say he is somebody who is actually interested in utilizing choreography to serve the piece. And Fosse is more interested in using the piece to serve his choreography, in my opinion, would be the difference, I would say. Jerome Robbins might be the single most important figure in terms of really bringing the opening number to its proper place of importance within the realm of musical theater, I would say.
Like the opening number in general, not specifically Fiddler on the Roof, but like the opening number of a musical being a really important part of a musical.
Yeah, in fact, it was him that told them to write the song Tradition. They were constantly talking about... So, this is originally adapted from a series of short stories by Sholem Aleichem called Tevye the Dairyman, right?
It has multiple names. Tevye the Dairyman, Tevye and his daughters.
Right. You got to understand, like, they're looking at this show as being an extremely specific piece that they're not expecting will appeal to a broad, goyish audience in the mid-60s. All of the creative team is Jewish, and they'd all written other shows, and to them, they were just like, we want to write something that's very personal to us, and that we feel much more of a personal connection to than, like, She Loves Me, which is just an exercise in a certain kind of romantic storytelling, or Fiorello, which is like, an esoteric political musical. We want to write something that speaks to our soul as Jews in a way. And so they're just adapting this Sholem Aleichem material, and it's like a sweet little tale about cultural assimilation and modernity and this guy and his daughters, right? Jerome Robbins is hammering them and saying, but what is the show about? And they'd be like, well, it's about this guy and his daughters, and like they want to get married to this. He's like, and Jerome Robbins, who is a famously sort of just an aggressive asshole in a lot of ways, and he would just be like, no, what is the show about? And he would ask them this question over and over and over again. And at one point, somebody said, well, it's about tradition. It's about changing of a set of traditions. Jerome Robbins' eyes light up, and he says, that is the show. Write me a song called fucking Tradition, and then we'll have a show. And they did, and it's, if you just think about how much this show would be different without the opening number Tradition, it takes it from being just a small family drama to being an epic story of a tale of a set of people that takes it into the anthropological realm, which is another thing which we can get into, which musical theater is especially well suited to do. Look at a set of people, because musicals often have to have a bunch of characters and stuff.
Yeah, it is hard to imagine Fiddler without the opening number Tradition. It just lays out for you right away a key theme in the musical and in the movie. The movie is very on the nose, where it just tells you what it's about. Is that the case for most musicals? Like, because of the nature of writing songs, is it the case that the themes are just really clearly stated and there's less subtlety in musicals? Or do you think subtlety is something that can still exist in musicals, but just doesn't exist with Fiddler?
Well, as I'm saying, it's really this anthropological thing that you can do with musicals that have a bunch of people coming out and saying, we all kind of think this thing. This is kind of our vibe. You couldn't have a movie that has a bunch of characters coming out and directly addressing, we are this kind of person. Like, this has been done many times. Think about the opening of West Side Story. That is setting the tone for that piece. It gives you lots of little specific character moments, but it's really about what is this dynamic between the Jets and the Sharks? How do they interact with each other? What is this set of people like? Jerome Robbins also famously saved a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, where they could never get the opening number right. Like, they tried one song that was about, like, forget war, we're going to divert you. And then they were like, we don't like that song. And then they tried another song that was like, let's have a sweet romantic evening called Love is in the Air. And it killed the show. The show's supposed to be very funny and bawdy, and it just did not put people in the right mindset. Jerome Robbins tells Sondheim, write me a song about comedy. Just give me a song that's like, this is a comedy, right? So they write Comedy Tonight. And then every joke in the show works because you've set people on the right path from the get-go. Yeah, that's what Robbins understands. This is a strange world that you're dropping people into with musical theater. So you need to set them up right, and you need to give them a sense of a lot of different things. And it's crazy. Like, Fiddler is one of the ultimate shows that is almost a one-man show. And yet it also has this broad Altman-esque set of different characters.
Okay, so you have just laid out a number of key musical theater figures who are involved in the creation of this musical. And so now thinking about the movie adaptation, whose contributions do you think carried over to the movies and whose didn't? Because you mentioned Stein, the book writer, was also involved in writing the screenplay of the movie. So I think that the story clearly, I mean, it's the same story, everything, like, it's the same dialogue, it's the same songs. So all of that carries through, and Stein's influence carries through for sure. The songs still occur, so Bach and Harnick's influence still carry through. But what about Jerome Robbins, who was not involved in the movie? Like, how does the choreography of the movie compare to the staged musical? And does that cause a difference between the two different pieces?
Well, we'll definitely get specifically into tradition in a second, which I would say is one of the clearest cases of them largely jettisoning what Jerome Robbins brought to that song. If you think of West Side Story, and I tell you the choreographer has a specific vibe, you can instantly tell what I'm talking about, right? Like, you know what I mean when I say, and that's sort of the Jerome Robbins style that we think about. When he did On the Town, the sailors are dancing in a pretty similar kind of way as the West Side Story gang members. But Fiddler, a lot of people don't realize this, is also a very clear case of an authorial choreographer. The key Jerome Robbins move in the show is hands up, hands clasped with other townspeople of Anatevka, and they're like moving connected to each other, often in a circle. The whole premise of this visual idea is they form a circle, the townspeople, and they all have their roles, and it is an eternal thing, and they're all connected. And gradually the circle is going to get broken a little bit. And so that's the central metaphor for the town. It looks really cool when you see like stage versions of the Fiddler choreography.
Yeah, and I guess that the connectedness of the townspeople doesn't come through as much in the movie. The concept of the circle breaking, obviously it's there, their home gets torn apart and they have to all scatter and find other homes, but that part does not come through at all in the movie. So what do you think about like the quality of this as a musical adaptation? Do you like this movie? Do you think it is a good adaptation of the musical?
I love it. I think it's I think it's a spectacular film. I remember I had a a voice teacher, one of the first people that I ever took voice lessons with. I was thinking about auditioning for Fiddler on the Roof in middle school, but I ended up not going in for that. I was talking with her I was like, I kind of want to about her opinions about Fiddler on the Roof, and she thought that the movie version was awful. And she said they were just much more concerned with, like, you know, having really authentic looking people and authentically looking shitty life. The town is dirty and gross. They just wanted to make it too realistic, and they kind of took a lot of the fun out of it. So I've always thought about that perspective when seeing the movie. But I love the movie, and I've seen it many times, and I've had many experiences with it. We did a lot of prep for this episode. We read the stories of Tevye the Dairyman. I read a book on the creation of Fiddler. We watched documentaries. We watched a version of the stage show with Alfred Molina.
It was like this illegally filmed version that was like super grainy and you couldn't see people's faces. And when we started watching it, it was like on YouTube or something. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to sit through this whole musical where like I can't even see their faces. Like this is really bad quality. I thought I was just going to watch the opening songs just to get a sense of it, but then stop. And it's just a testament to how great the musical is that despite the fact that I couldn't even distinguish their faces with the terrible recording, my ass was glued to the fucking seat. And I watched that whole shitty recording and it didn't even bother me because the musical's so good.
Yeah, and so we were really amped up for watching the movie. And then we watched the movie, and I'm like, this movie is a masterpiece. It is great. It's a perfect adaptation. Topol this is one of the greatest screen performances ever. But, you know, I felt the length a little bit. I was just kind of questioning how much would I want this to be the Fiddler that people see. Like, you know they're remaking Fiddler? Tommy Kail?
I knew they were remaking it. Who's Tommy Kail?
He's the director of Hamilton and Fosse Verdon, and Lin-Manuel Miranda's longtime collaborator and stuff.
That makes me, I guess, willing to give it a shot, but I do think it's so weird to remake it.
West Side Story, a lot of people were like, how could you remake that movie? And I was like, oh, you got to go back and rewatch that film. It is due for a remake. Like, there's a hardcore remake of West Side Story that has been longing for anybody who doesn't want to watch a lot of brown face and see a lot of shitty performances and stuff. Say what you will about the Spielberg remake, I actually think it's really great. I could see a Fiddler that is a little more exciting, because I do think that there are certain things that Jewison runs away from in terms of wanting to make it a movie that were bold choices, and I think perhaps the correct choice. Obviously, the film is a big success, but, you know, I don't think this is, let me say, this is a definitive Fiddler, but it's not the ultimate definitive Fiddler that could not be improved upon in some ways.
I think then you're misusing the term definitive, perhaps. We'll get into specifics of differences between the staged musical versus the movie musical. But for me, I want to say the biggest difference that comes through is that the staged musical is more lighthearted and fun and funny. And
exciting.
And the movie musical is more somber and has like a bittersweetness to all the jokes. And we'll compare Zero Mostel and Topol in a second, but Topol is definitely playing down the funniness a lot on purpose. So I do think there's a big difference in tone between the staged musical and the movie, but I like both of them. I don't think one is inherently better than the other. I think they're just two different flavors of an amazing source material.
This is a movie we're going to go through, not in a plot summary way, but kind of in a song-by-song way. And I think that if you see the specific choices that we talk about being made, we will find a way to talk about how this movie came to be as a movie.
I mean, first, let's just say the musical, and therefore the movie, opens with 3 bangers. Okay, Tradition, Matchmaker, and If I Were a Rich Man. So that's just like a great opening for a musical. Those 3 songs right in a row. But let's start with Tradition.
Tradition.
I think this is the greatest opening number in a musical ever. It's sort of set a paradigm of a kind of opening number, as I say, this kind of anthropological look at a society that is in a particular stasis that will then be challenged over the course of the rest of the show. These are Other shows like this would be Pacific Overtures, opens in a very similar way to tradition, the advantages of floating in the middle of the sea. The show Ragtime, I would say, is a kind of 3 sets of people version of this. In the Heights and the work of Lin-Manuel Miranda is incredibly indebted to Fiddler. And also, but beyond that, beyond how brilliant of a storytelling song it is, introduces you to Tevye, introduces you to the world of Russian Jews on the shtetl, is this song has fucking riffs, like tons of great riffs that are each distinctively sick in a way that most musical theater songs don't have, like a bunch of great riffs in one song.
Can you play one of them or 2 of them?
I'll play like 6 of them.
No, I genuinely really love the music in Fiddler. I think that what stands out to me is the songs that I like versus the songs I don't is how interesting is the melody. And Tradition is one of those that does have a very interesting melody.
It just sounds so weird. They're so willing to make abrasive sounding melodies that are beautiful. And they're not like just trying to write a poppy sounding score.
Yeah. It does feel very inspired by the culture they're trying to represent. And it doesn't feel like it's trying to be a great song. Like, it feels like that's not the main goal. Like, the main goal is to dig into what the song is about and create the best version of that in song form rather than just trying to write a hit.
Yeah, exactly. They're not sanitizing it for the purpose of making something poppy. And then in the process of this, they created the highest selling Broadway cast album of all time.
All right, one thing I'll say right now when I was comparing the staged musical versus the movie musical is when you watch the staged musical, Tradition booms at you. The voices are so loud, they are so stirring. In the movie musical, they're much more blended together, all of the townspeople's voices. There's a lot more contrast between soft vocals versus loud vocals. And I think movie musicals can do the contrast, like you can go soft and then you can go loud. They can do that way more than a staged musical can. I don't think the stage musical versus the movie musical is better or worse than the other. They're just very different in the way that Tradition is performed.
I do think the stage version is better as far as that you're talking about. Watching the movie this time helped me crystallize certain ideas that I've always had about like why movie soundtracks always they have to sound less exciting than the cast album versions of it. I've never quite understood why this was. But I think that movie musicals struggle to get loud because of the intimacy of the way that you film characters in a movie. The camera's just so close to them. They're forced to sing softly in a way that makes everything a little bit less proclaimed. And so, again, part of this also has to do with the choices being made by Jewison to make this a cinematic experience rather than just a recreation of the stage show, the kind of way that you would do in a movie musical adaptation in like the 50s. So one of the things is that he makes the choice to have most of the characters in Tradition, the townspeople, sing in their heads, not out loud. Like you show them at work, the mama's sewing or whatever, and it's in their head, and they're like, "Ooh, I found a way to Papa home." Their eyes are on their work, and they're thinking these thoughts. They're not saying, "Hey, buddy, this is who I am. I'm the mama, and you better listen to me." And so, like it's a lot more of a somber sort of meditative thing in the movie.
Yeah, I will say, so I like the Tradition number in the movie because I do like seeing the period authenticness. I like seeing all of their outfits. I love seeing them doing the different tasks that they do when they're working, the anvil and the hammer or whatever. I like seeing all of that. So the anthropological aspect of it that you mentioned before is spectacle and it is visually pleasing and interesting to watch. I don't like any parts of the movie where the songs are like in their heads. This is jumping ahead and we'll talk about it more in depth when we get there, but Sunrise Sunset I think is a very boring song in the movie because they're singing it entirely in their heads. And it's just more interesting to watch the characters actually singing it out loud.
This is part of trends of people trying to figure out how to make musicals seem less corny to an audience that has just decided that they're corny and weird. And this is a trend that people are just like, what if they're not singing out loud? Like, we're just showing really that they're singing in their heads. And I'm just like, I don't ever feel like this is something that's accomplished what you want to accomplish. Like, nobody, it doesn't make anybody think it's less corny, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it makes it less corny at all.
And so, again, Norman Jewison, he is a non-Jew. and we'll talk about his status as a goy directing this piece, which he felt incredibly connected to. And he feels incredibly connected to the Jewish people. But so if you just contrast what happens the first time the tradition strains come in, the boom, 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 and in the show, the whole town sweeps in, everybody holding arms, and they all sing tradition, right? In the movie, what happens in that boom, boom moment is a montage of iconography of Judaism. It goes, Star of David, menorah, rabbis, this. So it's very much just like, have you heard of Judaism? Like, we're talking about Judaism, the concept, right? It's not like this town of people who have this specific character and they all have a relationship to each other. It's like, you need to understand these characters are Jews. That's what the movie front loads.
One thing that I noticed from tradition, and this is more Tevye's dialogue before the song starts, is like, one thing that a movie can do that the musical can't do is that Tevye can look directly into the camera, or he can make a subtle eye movement looking up, and you know he's looking at God and talking to God. And that doesn't come through as much in a staged show because you're not close enough to see tiny eye movements like that. And you can't look at every audience all at once. So there is an intimacy to the movie that even comes through with tradition where Tevye will be in the foreground and the rest of the town will be in the background. You just feel so much closer to Tevye than you do the rest of the town, which creates a very different effect than the staged show.
Yeah, the movie also makes weird choices with it cuts out the three jokes that set up Yenta, Rav Nachum, and Avram. The way she sees and the way he looks, it's a perfect match. Like, all of this stuff is absent from the film. And I think that this would have to do with the fact that it would just, because of the montage effect that they're going for of shooting all of these different aspects of Anna Tevka life, I was thinking about this. It would be really weird to cut between people singing and having these moments while you're trying to show another shot of another person. You know what I mean? So it's like some of it has to do with it would just be really difficult to edit, I think. And that's part of why they made that decision.
It does, though. The end result is that you are closer to Tevye, I think, in the movie than you are in the musical. And the townspeople, Anna Tevka, is farther away from you and you're less involved with them in the movie than you are with the musical. That actually matches more with the original source material, Sholem Aleichem's Tevye the Dairyman. In those short stories, it's him narrating, and you are just getting such a peek into his thought process in a way that could never be achieved to that same extent in the stage show. And I think that's an interesting difference. And I don't think either one is better or worse than the other. I like the two different flavors.
No, it's true. This sounds like I'm trying to make criticisms of the movie, but I'm more just like, these are things that I really noticed this watch. And I was just thinking about like why they made these choices. And I think a lot of it had to do with, yeah, you're trying to balance different things. You got to make a decision. And the stage show was already incredibly successful. It had a particular character. A lot of it was characterized by Zero Mostel. Like, he sort of became synonymous with the show in a way. And I think, yeah, they were trying to run away from some of the things that a lot of the members of the creative team of the movie felt were too broad, I guess, about the show. Like, they sort of felt like this is not being taken seriously enough.
Wait, can we, we've mentioned Zero Mostel now a couple times. Can we quickly just compare Zero Mostel to Topol?
If you probably would recognize Zero Mostel from the original movie version of The Producers. He was the original Max Bialystock.
That might be my only familiarity with Zero Mostel, to be honest. Aside from like the cast recording of Fiddler, which I listened to.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true for most people. He was a blacklisted actor, partially blacklisted because of Jerome Robbins. Jerome Robbins collaborated with the House Un-American Activities Committee and named names. Zero Mostel never forgave him, but did end up working with him on Funny Thing Up at the Way to the Forum and Fiddler on the Roof. Mostel's famous line was, "The left doesn't blacklist." Once the blacklist lifted a little bit, Mostel was an insanely dominating force in Broadway theater in the early 60s. He won 3 Best Actor Tonys between 1960 and 1965. It's pretty crazy. And yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. Like, I love Zero Mostel. He is an absolutely incredible, forceful personality, but everybody said that he pretty much turned Fiddler into like a vaudeville show that was a vehicle for him to like do ad libs and make jokes with the audience members and shit.
And everybody assumed he would be cast in the movie. Norman Jewison, the director, actually didn't want to cast Mostel because he thought his larger-than-life quality works well for the stage, but wouldn't have worked well for the movie. And so this was a really controversial decision. Jewison said about Zero Mostel, he does everything for laughs. Too American, doesn't evoke a Russian dairy farmer. So he also thought that Topol was just more authentic as a Tevye and less perhaps stagey and musical theatery than Zero Mostel is. And I agree with all of those things. I think Topol, who was cast as Tevye, he embodies Tevye so well. I'm sure that Zero Mostel was great in the role of Tevye, but they're very different.
I will say that it is strange to me how much now, because Topol has become so much more identified with this role than most people ever are, even if it is a person who only had one big role. Topol it's not just that his career was taken over by playing Tevye, which he did many times in many stage productions for the rest of his life. It's that he put his DNA into almost every production of Fiddler that exists now because of this movie in ways that are a little bit weird. Almost like we watched this church production of Fiddler on the Roof with a bunch of teenagers, and the kid who is playing Tevye, he's talking like this, and I'm Tevye the Dairyman. It's like, you don't have to do an Israeli accent just to play, like, they are Russian, and I was thinking about this. It's like, it is kind of weird that Topol has a different accent than like Golda and everybody else in his family. But it's not something you really think about. But people now think that is what a Tevye is supposed to sound like. He's supposed to have an accent or something, but he doesn't have to.
I do think my familiarity with the movie has really highlighted for me, actors making choices and delivering lines in a certain way, and it's just so impressive to me if an actor is familiar with a really famous role and is able to do that same role but make it different and make their own choices. Because like when we watched, again, you mentioned that like church musical we watched a couple numbers from, and they're like teenagers, clearly like they cannot make their own choices. They're just delivering the lines in the exact way that they remember it being from the movie, and I think that's an indication of like an inexperienced actor. But I don't know, I think it is really interesting thinking about choices, because every way that Topol delivers his lines is ingrained in my bones, and so then when I hear recordings of Zero Mostel delivering lines slightly differently, I'm always like, oh, that's so different. Like, I love paying attention to how that line is delivered in each one. So maybe, for example, here's Topol doing it as Tevye in the movie.
You may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it's a tradition.
And now here's Zero Mostel doing it.
You may ask, how did this tradition get started? I'll tell you. I don't know. But it's a tradition.
I love Zero Mostel. He is an absolutely insanely egotistical person. Interestingly enough, yeah, he was very bitter against Jewison for not casting him. But Jewison then, in his next movie, Jesus Christ Superstar, cast Mostel's son, Zach, in the role of Herod.
You think it was like an apology?
It's some kind of weird apology. I think when he got the call, Zach was there with Zero, and Zero yells from the other room, "Why doesn't he ask Chaim Topol's son to do it?" Yeah, the journey of the adaptation from the Sholem Aleichem stories through the musical into the movie, I would say, is one of putting a finer and finer point on the persecution that the Jews are facing in Anatevka. The original Sholem Aleichem story is written pre-Holocaust, but post-pogroms, and the character of Tevye does move to New York, but there's just a little bit less, like, fear of the Goys in the Sholem Aleichem stories. Some of the only added scenes in the movie version are like a lot more Nazi coded with the constable. They're going for like a banality of evil, just following orders thing that is a valid thing to talk about, but I think was just something that people were really, really focused on at the time in the 60s. Like the banality of evil was like a new concept.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you're right that they put more of a fine point on it through each new adaptation. It is there in the original source material. Like, as you mentioned, those Tevye stories were written pre-Holocaust but post-pogroms. So Sholem Aleichem himself, he emigrated to New York and then to Geneva after witnessing the violent pogroms in 1905 in Kiev. So he himself left his home because of violence against Jews. So that is there in the original stories, but it is much more subtle, perhaps.
And funny and absurd in a way. Like in the pogrom in the story, it's very absurd. All of these goys come to his house and they're like, "Hey, Tevye, hey, what's up?" And they're like, "So we decided we're going to do a pogrom." And he's like, "What? You're going to do a pogrom?" And they're like, "Yeah, do you mind if we like smash some windows and stuff?" And he's like, "Come on, guys, you don't want to do this." And they're like, "No, we know, like, you're cool, but like, we got to do a pogrom." And he's like, "Listen, can I pogrom myself? Can I just break my own windows and smash up a couple things, and then will you be happy?" And they're like, yeah, sure, just pogrom yourself. So he's like, "Oh, say." So I get myself a pogrom, and it's very funny, and or it's not funny, but it's like it's not as dark as it is in the show in a way.
But then there is the ending chapter of the short stories where he is forced out, like Tevye is forced out of Anatevka. The difference here is that this ending chapter in short stories happens way later in Tevye's life, where he's really old. Golda is dead. Motel, Seidel's husband, is dead. And so them leaving Anatevka in the original short stories happens at a very different time in their lives. And interestingly, that chapter where it is more solemn, like, okay, no, this isn't just a joke. This is real persecution. That new chapter, Sholem Aleichem wrote later than the rest of the chapters because he wanted to make a stronger political statement after hearing about the resurgence of blood libel in Kiev. All of this was there, even in the original chapters, it's like there, but it's buried under humor, because Sholem Aleichem, he was a very funny writer. Like, I really recommend everybody listen or read the original stories, or we listen to it on audiobooks. It was a really great reading performed by Theodore Bickel, who's a famous actor who played Tevye in a large number of stage productions. So the audiobook recording is really great.
And the audiobook recording just starts with the sound of a violin, too, by the way. They're just like, we can't fight this.
Yeah, it's like Fiddler.
Yeah.
But the stories are really delightful and funny. So more matching in tone, perhaps, to the staged musical compared to the movie musical. But I really recommend them.
Yeah, they're great, great reads. Yeah, we've thrown a lot on the table. Do you want to move on now to the second song? Since this opening number throws a lot on the table. And again, one more point of contrast with the stage show versus the movie. The stage show has more stuff in it. Like, it's got these several little jokes that it cuts away to different people. But the stage show gets in and out of tradition in 6 minutes. The movie version of tradition is just much slower and methodical. And weirdly, it takes 10 minutes to get through the entirety of tradition in the movie.
I personally like when movie adaptations of musicals take their time more. Like, I really liked that in Wicked compared to the stage show.
Great point.
Okay, let's move on to the next song, which is called the Overture in the movie, which when I mentioned it's called Overture, Sam was so offended that it was called Overture because in your opinion, it's not technically an overture.
It happens after tradition, so it is not before anything. It's not the first thing that happens in the evening, which I think is pretty important to being an overture. It also does not have themes from the show. Like, it's just a violin cadenza written by John Williams, who did the music for this film adaptation. And we'll talk about him in a little bit more, but this is one of his great contributions. He won an Oscar for his work of additional music written for Fiddler. And I would say also probably for his brilliant music direction. But so it doesn't have any themes. It comes after tradition. It is like an overture in an old movie musical because they then play it over the course of the long opening credits sequence. I kind of think this is a much better version of doing that than most movies did back then, because it's not an overture, because it's just like listening to an amazing violin piece. It's not just a static shot. I mean, it sort of is a static shot of the fiddler against the sunrise, but something is happening.
Yeah, I agree that it's not. It's more interesting than other more classical like songs playing over credit sequences. And the reason for that is because it's an amazing piece of music. I want to play an extended clip from this overture because it's just really beautiful. So for this musical piece, they were able to convince Isaac Stern, who at the time was the greatest fiddler in the world, to perform the music, the fiddling pieces in the show. When John Williams learned that he was going to have access to the greatest fiddler in the world, he's like, oh, well, then I'm really going to give him something good to play. And he made it way more challenging than he would have if he was just working with your run-of-the-mill professional fiddler.
I think most professional fiddlers could probably handle anything that you throw at them, but maybe not quite as good as Isaac Stern.
I don't know. John Williams specifically said, and we watched a documentary about this, he wrote the piece with Isaac Stern in mind, knowing that he was going to perform it. And what's really interesting is that Isaac Stern, he decided to play the piece a half note flat to make it sound more realistic, because he figured if this is just a fiddler in the town of Anatevka, he's not going to be like the most amazing fiddler ever. And I think that really gives a nice haunting quality to the piece. So, Sam, how did they decide to go with Fiddler on the Roof? Because there is no fiddler in the original Sholem Aleichem stories. So the character of the fiddler is created for the musical and then carries over into the movie. He's viewed as like a metaphor for the Jewish spirit. But what inspired them to create this character and to name the show Fiddler on the Roof?
They were searching for different titles. Again, what if they just called it Tradition or something? I don't know. Or like, they were going to call it Tevye and His Daughters. I don't know. Maybe it's not an exciting title. It's nothing compared to Fiddler on the Roof, which is one of the greatest titles that I could possibly imagine for anything. The entire title of Fiddler comes from a Chagall painting. I didn't think that we were going to so quickly be immediately talking about Chagall again, as we had the brief mention in Alice in Wonderland a couple of episodes ago, but here we are. And the fiddler that Chagall was painting in his famous painting of Fiddler on the Roof was his drunk uncle. So the goal, they're trying to make him sound a drunk too, with the half step flat. They were all very inspired by the work of Chagall, who was a Jewish artist working in the same milieu that they were writing in, and he was also very popular at the time. So they came up with a list of titles they gave to Hal Prince, who was producing the original production of Fiddler on the Roof. He just looked at them and he said, "Oh, you should call it Fiddler on the Roof, because then it sounds like a musical." It's just like, you never would think for a fucking second that this is just a random aspect that they shoved in that has almost nothing to do with the rest of the show. It's just, they thought, Fiddler? Well, hey, that's musical. It's a musical. Let's call it the thing that has an instrument name in it. They come up with the idea for this character. What do we literally see the Fiddler on the Roof? He has nothing to do with the rest of the show, but he kind of makes the show.
Yeah, he's there throughout the show. He is such a spirit, like such a character. I love his goofy little smile in the movie that he gives. So even though Isaac Stern performed the music, he's not actually like the actor playing the fiddler. I just want to say that.
That would have been cool, though.
That would have been cool, but he'd probably be a little less spry.
Yeah.
But no, the fiddler, I really like his character, and he doesn't feel shoehorned into the show at all. They really did a great job of, once they decided to go with Fiddler on the Roof, of blending that character in with the whole story.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You just think about them reverse engineering, like, how do we get from a Fiddler on the Roof to, like, the concept of tradition in the opening number? And it's such brilliant writing. Like, a Fiddler on the Roof sounds crazy, no, but you might say in our little village of Manatevka, each and every one of us is a fiddler on the roof. Try to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune. And how do we keep our balance? Tradition. Bam. Like, we got from the idea of a fiddler on the roof to Jewish tradition in 6 lines or whatever. It's amazing.
So the title is inspired by, and the fiddler character is inspired by paintings by Chagall. But Chagall also then, once they settled on that, it inspired the color palette of the stage production. The Chagall color palette, it's kind of dark and mysterious, a lot of like dark reds and greens and blues that come through in the paintings, and that they also do for the stage show. A lot of people criticize the movie as not following through on the Chagall color palette that the stage show has. I think the movie looks gorgeous. The cinematographer Oswald Morris, who he won an Oscar for Best Cinematography for Fiddler, by the way, he wanted to really have a lot of muted colors and a lot of brown based on the way that the village looked, because they shot on location in what was then Yugoslavia, and he was inspired by the way that the village looked and wanted to give that brown. He wanted to pull that brown through. So much so that in order to achieve the brown color, he decided to film the whole movie through a silk stocking spread out in front of the lens of the camera to really give it like a textured brown. And they in fact had issues trying to find a stocking that was big enough without any seams in the middle. They had to find the biggest possible stocking they could in order to achieve this.
Yeah, and so you have to understand what they're doing when they do this technique, which is known as net diffusion, is they're creating, right, like these tiny little lines that light is bending around. So it gives everything a bit of more of a glowing look. If you think about like old glamour shots, it makes it look both shittier but also beautiful in a way.
And it gives it a lot of texture. When I learned that they did that, my thought was, it's weird that we don't actually see the fabric of the stocking at all on the actual movie. But then I noticed, after paying attention to that, you can actually see hatch marks from the stocking. It's especially noticeable in the outdoor scenes if you look at the sky. So you can actually see the lines of the stocking fabric. I can't believe I never noticed it before if I wasn't looking for it, because it looks kind of obvious to me. And that brings up, like, doing this is a risk. It's not just an effect that you're trying in post that you can do nowadays with digital stuff. You are risking, if it doesn't look great, all of your film has that look. And it's kind of like when Robert Altman dyes his entire film stock yellow. It's like you are risking ruining all of your film stock. Obviously, they did tests first to make sure it looks okay. But the result is that it has much richer texture than you would get if you're shooting on digital and putting an effect in during post-production.
This is just one of all of these choices that Jewison and the creative team is making to just mess this up. This can't be slick. We need to dirty things up and muddy the waters in a way, because they are aware that in this new 70s context, these 3-hour-long adaptations of hokey, quote-unquote hokey musicals are not playing well with audiences. So it's similar to Fosse, making everything in cabaret look shittier. There's this thing where like we need to make musicals have a kind of grittiness.
And they achieve a grittiness in Fiddler on the Roof. It's amazing how beautiful it is, considering how brown it is. I typically don't think of a brown look for cinematography as necessarily being beautiful, but it really is in this movie.
Yeah, if you literally make the lens brown as well as the things that you're shooting brown, I guess it makes it all cohere better.
Okay, let's move on to Matchmaker.
Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match.
Do you like the song? Because I feel like I liked it a lot as a kid, because it's like, look, it's a bunch of girls and I'm a girl, And now it's not one of my favorite songs, but I recognize that it is still a great song. It doesn't annoy me or anything. It's just I think I liked it more growing up than I do currently, but it's still, I recognize that it's a great moment in the movie, and it is a great example of characters changing their minds throughout a song.
That's exactly what I was just about to bring up. This is the platonic ideal of the kind of thing that people say about what a musical theater song should do, which is it should take you from one place at the beginning of the song to a different place at the end. And right, so like obviously they're kind of excited about the prospect of Yenta bringing them some guy, and then over the course of the song they talk about all of the potential pitfalls and most likely the fact that they'll get a shitty guy because they're poor. And so then in the end it's like, actually, matchmaker, don't give me a guy. I don't want to have a matchmaker anymore. So, and it's very simple, and yet it's a complete moment.
I mentioned before, this is the only scene that doesn't contain Tevye, which I think is still a fun and interesting scene, because the song is great, and also because the actresses, like the 3 women who play the daughters, they're great. And the other scenes that I don't like as much, I feel like it's usually like the male actors bringing them down. So just a brief note on the daughters. There's Zeidel, played by Rosalind Harris. Zeidel is the eldest daughter. She's just perfect.
Incredible performance. If you look at her in the scene when Model is trying to ask for her hand to her dad, the look on her face is heartbreaking, and you just want to give her a hug. She's so good.
And then you got Huddle, the second daughter, and she's played by Michelle Marsh. Now, this actress is not Jewish. She's French-American. She wasn't sure if she was right for the role, but Norman Jewison convinced her that she'd be great for it. She's not my favorite.
No, that's because Hoddle is the worst daughter, even though she's supposed to be the best daughter. Like, she's supposed to be like the perfect child, the prettiest one who's also got a mind of her own and isn't afraid to speak up and talk to Perchik about the lessons that they're learning and stuff, but she's just kind of weirdly lame.
Like, her character's supposed to be really smart, and they don't give her any of that.
Perchik's also supposed to be smart, and he seems like a fucking dumbass, too.
Yeah, the actor is a large reason, perhaps, for that.
Maybe, but I think they've always fucked up Perchik in, like, virtually every production I've ever seen. Perchik in the story, he is way cooler. In the actual source material, the Hoddle and Perchik, like, they fuck. And Tevye is like, okay, I guess he fucked my daughter. Like, they're much more modern than they're presented as.
All of the characters in the original source material, the Shalom Aleichem stories, all of the characters, like all the side characters, are way more developed. Like even Golda, who in the original stories, like you barely get anything from her directly, and she's presented as Tevye's always like the one standing up for his daughters and giving in to what they want, whereas Golda's like the hard ass. And that's also kind of true in the stage show and the movie. But in the original stories, you also know as you're reading or as you're listening to the audiobook that Tevye is definitely a unreliable narrator. There are little clues that suggest that Golda is a much more rich character in her own way outside of Tevye's perception of everything. Like Golda has these secrets with her daughters and stands up for them in ways that we don't see in the staged production or the movie. I know Pauline Kael thinks Golda's character in the movie is like, it's like one of the biggest shames of the movie that her character is not developed more. And I think that's the case for all the side characters, like all the daughters, all of the love interests.
Model is entirely invented for the stage show. He's a character in the original stories, but he has nothing of his affect. Model's not like a nerd or shy, really. They invent his character for the stage show.
I don't like his character.
Well, you're not alone.
It's like he's just like too nervous. He's too weird. He's too like, I don't know.
But it's fun that she likes him.
I think the fact that I identify with the daughters makes me feel like it's just not, I wouldn't like him.
Well, you have these sorts of issues. But okay, this actually brings up a really cool thing about the story and this movie, I think, which I want to step back and sound a little bit less harsh on this film adaptation. Tradition is a song where there's a lot of notable things to point out what they're going for as far as making this a movie rather than a stage show. But I think this movie is wonderful. One of the greatest movies we've covered on the podcast. Interestingly enough, this might be the least dated or one of the least dated feeling films that we've covered on the podcast. What do you think about that?
One of the least dated. Yeah, and maybe it's because it's not about American culture at all. So therefore, like, there is less of a sense of like, oh, things aren't like that anymore.
Yeah, and I also think another thing has to do with the nature of these daughter characters. They're all sort of like Disney princesses from the 80s. The essence of what makes Fiddler cool is it sets up this thing where it's like, hey, we all really like tradition, right? You're going to get excited to watch us be traditional. But then as the story unfolds, you're like, oh no, the whole point of this story is for an audience of people who recognize that these traditions are about to be broken and that we shouldn't be necessarily standing on these old ways. Modernity is creeping in whether you want to or not. And these girls, they all get to be their version of a sort of defiant Disney princess character. You get like these 3 different variations on marrying for love rather than for expectations. The girls all feel very modern in a way because that's the whole lens that you're looking at them through.
And I think that's because the themes are just evergreen. Like, it always shocks me when I read something that was written a long time ago that is still extremely relatable. Like, I was shocked hearing the Shalom Aleichem stories and feeling how modern they felt with these concepts of the daughters not wanting to have the marriages that their parents want for them and them forging their own path and doing things out of love and picking where they want to go in life and the parent supporting them. Like, the parent-child theme and the theme of following a path that perhaps is not as practical, but following it out of love. All of those things are such a fundamental part of the human experience. And it's similar to when I read the Decameron, which was written in the 1300s, and it's an Italian book. And the sense of humor is still so relatable. It's a lot of like jokes about people fucking. And it's just crazy when you read a really old work and realize that although a lot of things have changed with humanity, there are certain things that are still exactly the same. Okay, so we were talking about Matchmaker. We were going through the different daughters. We talked about Zeidel and Hodel. The third daughter is Chava. She's played by the actress Neva Small. She's a singer, so she made her singing debut at age 10 in the NYC Opera and made her Broadway debut the following year at age 11. So she's like a singer through and through, and you can see that.
We watched a documentary about the making of the movie. It's got, these 3 old ladies versions of the daughters. And let me tell you, these are the 3 fucking cutest old ladies you've ever seen because they're these actress types who've not really had great careers since then. And so they're all just so locked into this experience. And they all vividly can talk to you about every vocal choice and every word that they're making because you can tell they've just obsessed over this one thing that they did for the last 50 plus years. But it's kind of cute in a very like old musical theater lady way.
These 3 ladies, they are such divas in this documentary. What was the name of the documentary, by the way?
Fiddler's Journey to the Big Screen.
Yeah, they do this hilarious thing where they'll be like, oh yeah, and what was that one line? Oh, it's been so long. I don't know if I can remember. And then they just do it perfectly and you know that they're like obsessed with their own performances in Fiddler. And that's the case actually. Every actor involved in this movie, they are most well known for Fiddler on the Roof, with the exception of Perchik, who is like the worst one. Like we do not like his performance. It's by Paul Michael Glaser, and he plays Starsky in Starsky and Hutch. And he also was in Something's Gotta Give, and he directed a number of movies like The Cutting Edge and The Running Man and Kazam. So he's known outside of Fiddler. One thing that I thought was really cute in the documentary is the daughters apparently wanted to be super methody. So they grew their armpit hair out and they ate a bunch of sweets to gain weight because they wanted to like be more realistic. And then when they started...
That's why they went on to gain weight. They're like peasants.
Yeah, well, maybe they just thought it'd be like fun. But when they started filming, like Norman Jewison, the director, was like, no, wait. Shave those pits and lose some weight, okay?
I'd actually not heard about the losing weight thing. That's fucked up.
I don't think he actually said, like, lose some weight. I think he just said cut back on the sweets. Like, don't try to gain weight for these roles.
But the pit shaving thing, I think is very funny to imagine somebody seeing that in the shot, and he's like, wait, have we not had their arms go up till now? I didn't realize this was a problem. Which I have to say, I disagree with that choice, both aesthetically as well as dramaturgically. Like, they should have shaved armpits. And also, come on, man, shaved armpits look cool. Why do people not like shaved armpits?
Do you mean unshaved armpits?
Yes, sorry, I meant unshaved armpits look totally cool. I don't get why Americans are so squeamish about shaved armpits.
So, Matchmaker, it's a fun song, and I think one of the funnest parts is Seidel doing the Yenta impersonation. And I think this is a great example of different choices made by different actresses. So I want to play for you a clip of Seidel, played by Rosalind Harris in the movie, doing her Yenta impersonation.
Mama, I found him! Will you be a lucky bride? He's handsome, he's tall, that is from side to side, but he's a nice man, a good catch, right? Right.
And now here is Seidel from the original cast recording for the stage production.
Baba, I found him! Will you be a lucky bride? He's handsome, he's tall, that is from side to side, but he's a nice man, a good catch, right? Right.
This is maybe a rare example of the movie having more crunch and having more forceful stylistic choices in the singing. The musical version, it's much more like operatic and boring, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. All I ever think about when I think about these women in these old cast recordings is just like, I really miss the days when we used to have ladies in musicals that would be like, I'm just a lady. You know, like we don't have that anymore.
Okay, next song. If I Were a Rich Man.
Ever heard of it?
I think this scene is my favorite scene in the movie. I love this song. I love this scene. And the shots of Tevye stomping on the barn and the dust flying up at his boots is just so ingrained in my bones. And I don't know, I really love it. And I love Tevye's clothes. I just want to say, I always kind of wanted to like dress like him. Like I love his like slouchy, comfortable look, linen shirt that looks comfy, and then those pants and his boots. It's kind of one of my ideal styles, to be honest. I really love this song, and I love this scene so much. In this scene in the movie, it's very tightly choreographed, how many seconds it takes for him to get from one side of the barn to the other. And hearing about the way they did this scene in the documentary that we watched really made me appreciate John Williams's role in this. Because if I think about him winning an Oscar for adapting music that was already written by other people, and the songs are just performed the way they're written. At first, I just didn't think that he's doing that much. You know, like what did he really do? What did he really add?
I mean, he did write some original material. There's the cadenza, and then there's also, he wrote this intro to Miracle of Miracles, which we will play when we get to that, and it sounds extremely like a piece of John Williams music.
Yeah, but like aside from that, like the cadenza itself is really a fantastic achievement. But before I learned that he wrote that, it just didn't make sense to me why it takes that much skill to do. But then hearing him talk in the documentary about how closely he worked with Norman Jewison to learn every camera movement that occurs in all of the songs where the characters are singing, and how that informed what direction he would give to the actors for their singing, like how loudly they should be singing depending on where the camera is in relationship to them and how they're moving around. That really made me appreciate more what it means to adapt like a staged musical into a movie in terms of the music. And he also, he increased the size of the orchestra, for example, to give it a more full feeling. So he did do a lot during the adaptation.
Just to kind of clarify, in a stage show, you have the director of the piece, and then you have the music director. The director is number one, but the music director is in charge of not just the singers, but also the orchestra, and they set the pace. It's an incredibly important creative position. They're responsible for kind of half of the way the show is expressed.
Something else about this scene and this song, the way it's done in the movie, that I think it's a really great illustration of the physicality of Topol, the actor. So Topol, at the time of filming this, was 36 years old, whereas Tevye, the character, he's supposed to be in his 50s. And I think they do a really good job of making him seem in his 50s, like the makeup that they give him. But really, I think what stands out is the physicality of Topol and how he made himself move like a person in his 50s. And he used a technique called muscle locking, where he would lock his muscles together while moving around to reduce his mobility, because he knew that an older person would have less mobility. I just love the way he's stomping around and holding his fists up in such a strong and physically characterized way, especially in this scene, but throughout the movie.
And this song's a banger. It has actually weirdly had a place as a kind of a hit song in the modern era. Like, it's one of the few musical theater songs that anybody has had a hit with a version of, at least in the last 30 years, I guess, other than, does Hamilton have any hits? I don't know.
Are you referring to Gwen Stefani's If I Was a Rich Girl?
Yes. What else could I possibly be referring to?
I just wanted to confirm that that was what we were talking about here.
Which that song's a cover, by the way, too, of like I think like a Caribbean group's song that like she redid it. I love that song. I love that album. That's like one of the greatest one album artists of all time is Gwen Stefani. Like one solo album.
I just remember driving around to cross country practice during the summer, listening to that album. It was just so fun. One thing I want to say about If I Were a Rich Man, the theme of wealth plays a much larger role in the original Shalom Aleichem stories. The first chapter in those series of short stories is Tevye. He starts out poor, and then he comes into luck and wealth when he helps out two lost rich women, and then he uses that money to get himself started as a dairyman. And it's a funny story. It really shows Tevye as a very flawed but beloved character. And then another chapter, I think the only other chapter that's missing in the musical and the movie, but that's present in the original short stories, is that Tevye, he's doing really well as a dairyman, and he manages to put away a pretty decent amount of money, but then he gets maybe a little greedy, and a relative comes to him and convinces him to invest it into a business deal, and the investment does not go well, and he loses all of that money. And it's interesting to me that they keep that theme to at least some degree in the musical and the movie with the song If I Were a Rich Man, but they don't really explore it that much beyond this song and beyond the possibility of Zeidel marrying Laserwolf.
Yeah, and this is also probably a decent place to bring in Tevye's relationship to God and Judaism in the original stories and in these adaptations. Tevye doesn't talk to God in the stories. He's just telling a story to you, the reader. He doesn't ever, have these moments where he's monologuing at God or like praying or anything like that. They added the iconic relationship to God that Tevye has in the musical version, where he's kind of like, he's razzing him a little bit. They wanted to have a sort of brotherly relationship rather than a fatherly relationship with God. In the movie version, they had to specify where he was looking, and so they made a white board with the Star of David in the middle. They had to place it at a specific height, like on a pole, for Topol to be looking at whenever he's talking to God, specifically to keep his eye line and I guess his sense of import. So the relationship that Tevye has to Judaism and the show's relationship to Judaism is different, I think, in the stories in a way than it is in the musical adaptation, because in the Hava storyline in the book or in the stories, Golda's like, you're just hiding behind Judaism. This is your daughter. You're just throwing out these quotes and throwing out these like verses from scripture to keep yourself from dealing with, the emotionality of your life, right? And he sort of thinks about that in a way. And in the musical, it's like you're supposed to really respect Judaism. Do you know what I mean? Or like you're supposed to really think like, no, this is very important. And in fact, it's what sort of keeps Tevye from being a monstrous character when he ultimately disowns Kava, because you're like, no. You have made it clear to me that this is very, very important, your faith, and that this is there's nothing that could possibly be more important. And I don't know, as a person who's not religious, it is interesting to me how I can get sucked into characters' religiosity in a way that makes me, it's part of why I love Tevye, is that he's so religious.
Yeah, I think some of that difference is the original stories. Shalom Aleichem's not writing them to explain Judaism to non-Jewish people. He very notably wrote in Yiddish. I'm sure he didn't only want it to be for other Jews, but like he wasn't writing it to introduce Judaism to non-Jewish people the way that the musical is. Like in the musical, he explains what a prayer shawl is. They're clearly like aware that non-Jewish people are going to be engaging with the musical and the movie. That really does make a difference in terms of the way Tevye's relationship with God is presented.
And speaking of Judaism, well, today is the Sabbath, we find out.
May God bless you and grant you long life.
May the Lord fulfill our Sabbath prayer for you.
I think this song we're probably going to talk about least of any number in this show. It's a decent song. It sets the mood. It's a sweet moment, but it's one of those moments in musicals that a lot of people don't spend enough time on, which is just the not knocking it out of the park song. Just a kind of simple song. It's not going to be anybody's favorite song in the show, but it gets from point A to point B.
It's a pretty song. Pauline Kael points out in this song, she thinks it's an example of Norman Jewison kind of being a square director, not really taking many chances because he does really obvious things where they're lighting the menorah and then let's cut to other families lighting their menorahs. Like that's the transition between cuts is like, oh, a different menorah in a different room. And so she views that as maybe a little uninspired. I think I typically view the song as like, okay, it's a little boring. But this time around, I was appreciating the beauty.
It's beautiful, but it's also a little like scary and solemn. And it's like this is serious. We're dealing with really important things now. You know, like it's got like a weightiness to it.
And so obviously this song, the Sabbath Prayer, is straight up about Judaism. And maybe it's a good time to talk about Norman Jewison being a non-Jew directing this movie. So because his last name's Jewison, everybody in his life always assumed he was Jewish. He would get bullied in school by anti-Semitic people because they assumed he was Jewish. And so as a result, he actually identified quite a lot with Jewish people because everybody treated him like he was Jewish. He identified with Judaism enough that he got married with a rabbi. Like the rabbi was the one who married him and he got married under a chuppah. And he says that he thinks the reason he got hired to direct Fiddler on the Roof is that the studio executives all assumed he was Jewish and thought therefore he'd be a good person to direct it. And he was like, just so you know, like I'm not actually Jewish.
Yeah, and their response to him, according to him, was they sort of go, and then one guy saves it and goes, well, we don't want you to just make shtetl kitsch or something. And he's like, okay. And so he's like, I think they were covering their ass, and they still were like, fuck, I can't, we just hired this non-Jew. But he did a good job. So Jewison comes from this pipeline that we've discussed before, which is the television in the 50s pipeline, except he had a little bit of a different background than somebody like Sidney Lumet or John Frankenheimer, where he was more famous for directing a lot of the really cool musical theater-y variety specials that they had in the 50s. This is just, in my opinion, this is a kind of a director who will never exist again. The director who starts off in musical theater variety specials and then moves into film. There is no other person who's ever going to be like that. Jewison, he's not an auteur, okay? Like, this is a non-auteur, would you say?
Yeah, I agree. He's a lot like Sidney Lumet, where Sidney Lumet does not describe himself as an auteur. Jewison serves the project and is not really doing that many stylistic choices. I'd say the most stylistic choices I see in Fiddler is when Tevye is contemplating what to do each time one of his daughters wants to marry somebody else. And then there's just this weird shot of them being very far in the background while Tevye is up close. This changing of the distance, like the physical distances between the characters. That's the most notable stylistic choice in the movie. But otherwise, it's all very safe, perhaps.
There's a couple of freeze frames that sort of have a kind of modernity to them, but really more of a late 60s rather than the early 70s. I think he's less of an auteur than Sidney Lumet, no matter how Sidney Lumet would describe himself. But I would say that this is by far Jewison's best movie that I've seen. As I say, he's got a real unfortunate tendency to make things boring. And I don't know if this is because he's not a stylist or whatever. He's just being like, well, let me present the piece and not adding any flair to it. But we just watched Rollerball.
Yeah, that one sucked.
Boring as fuck. But in Fiddler, though, I think he's really being a great actor's director. If you think about needing to get the tone just right of these characters in these musical sequences, he really does a good job of calibrating these performances very minutely. I think there's a lot of really interesting, really great acting in the movie. And they also talked about he was just a really good audience member. Like Topol said, he would always laugh genuinely at a thing that you said, no matter how many times he's heard it, in a way that was it was almost like he was laughing at a different thing every time. I think that's what you would kind of need to get energy from actors in this presentational form of storytelling, in a way. And his skills all came together. He weirdly was the right person to do this. Increasingly, there's a lot more we really should only have Jewish people in this show. It's really weird to have non-Jews directed or be in it. The Alfred Molina production that we talked about was starring Alfred Molina, who's not Jewish, and it was directed by a British guy. And I think there was a lot of, this really feels off. But Jewison, again, it's he's this person who, he kind of identified with being Jewish, even though he wasn't Jewish. So is that exactly the right sweet spot in a way?
Yeah, and, you have to remember this is at a time when there was less discussion about representation of the actors and the filmmakers for the characters that they're depicting.
And yet they sought out a director whose last name sounded like he was Jewish.
That's true. And Norman Jewison specifically, he said he didn't want the movie to just appeal to a Jewish audience. So he was, even though he identified to a certain degree with the Jewish community, he did try to make it have a broader appeal. Pauline Kael, the film critic, so she herself is Jewish, although probably her most controversial movie review ever is on Shoah, a Holocaust documentary, and she's gotten a lot of shit for basically saying that she thought it was like boring and not well made. The thing that she said that got the biggest heat was that it lacked moral complexity. So her thoughts on Jewish representation in movies is you know, it comes with some controversy, perhaps.
It just is funny to think about. Like, I thought that review, you know, you would think it indicates almost a sort of modern thing that's like, I'm Jewish and this is trauma porn or whatever. But then for her to go on and be like, no, it lacks moral complexity, this tale of the Holocaust. I understand why she got shit for it.
No, but about the trauma porn thing, that is something she cares about. So she loves Fiddler on the Roof. She thinks it's absolutely smashing. She said, it is not especially sensitive, it is far from delicate, and it isn't even particularly imaginative, but it seems to me the most powerful movie musical ever made. So she sees some flaws in it, but she loves it. And as in terms of the trauma porn thing, she said that she herself is not a fan of the kind of movies that is, in her words, a public certificate of past suffering. But although that Fiddler might do that a little bit, like it certainly is about the persecution of Jewish people to some degree, it has so much more to it than just that. Whereas I think, obviously, like Shoah, she would say, is not doing that.
This could lead us to talking of a larger conversation about how Fiddler is perceived by, like, Fiddler, the musical, and I think largely you could say this movie, which is very, very famous and very successful and still watched by people all the time. It's a little synonymous with this 5,000-year-old faith in a way that is kind of something that I could see annoying some people. But at the same time, what in Christianity could you possibly say has the level of becoming synonymous with the religion? Like okay, so for example, the bottle dance, which we will talk about later, that is something that is not like a Jewish thing. That was something that Jerome Robbins saw a drunk guy do it at wedding, and he was like, okay, I'm going to make that into a thing for the show. And then that has now become like de rigueur in American Reformed Jew, like bar mitzvahs and weddings, and they sing sunrise, sunset at weddings. This has been passed down now as a part of the culture itself. So that, to me, is the greatest argument that I can think of for why Fiddler is, in fact, the most important and influential musical of all time, because there is no other piece of art in the 20th century that has now become a part of one of the oldest religions in the world. And you know what I mean? Like I can see, too, how then, you know, if your grandma really wants you to see Fiddler on the Roof, because this will teach you a lot about your people, and you're a young Jew, you could be like, Fiddler on the Roof's lame as fuck. I don't care about that shit, you know?
Yeah, I think Fiddler might seem uncool to some people because of its hokiness and cheesiness. My sister, Emma, she went to performing arts college, and they went around in one of her classes and said what their favorite musical was, and she said Fiddler on the Roof, and everybody like rolled their eyes as if that was like a really lame choice and not a cool choice at all. But it is like a fantastic fucking musical, you know? I think it is like, because it's the type of movie that your grandparents want to show you. Maybe that's especially true for Jewish people growing up, I don't know. But I could imagine it being a little eye-rolly if older people are pushing it upon you. And it's very family friendly too.
There's all these old musicals that are like so much cooler than people's perception of them. You know, musical theater kids who think they're cool or whatever, they will periodically talk about The Music Man or Fiddler or some of these shows as like being really lame compared to, say, Les Mis or Phantom of the Opera. And I just have to say, they're categorically wrong. The idea that Les Mis is cooler than Fiddler on the Roof is completely false. It is incredibly uncool, in my opinion.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next song, which is To Life.
To life, l'chaim, 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 to life.
One of the ultimate bangers.
Fucking love this song. So leading up to the song is a scene between Tevye and Laser Wolf. And this is a great scene. And it's a great scene because of the writing. Like that joke about Tevye thinks they're talking about a cow and Laser Wolf thinks they're talking about Seidel and their confusion there. It's just always going to be funny. But also, the actor who plays Laser Wolf is really, really delightful. So the actor's name is Paul Mann. He's actually an acting teacher.
Yeah, this is another one of these 70s, let's give a big acting teacher a juicy, small role in our movie, and he knocks it out of the park. This is like the best acting teacher performance, I might say, in one of these 70s movies.
He's such like a Santa Claus in it. Like he just looks, I don't know, so cheerful, and he's so fun to watch. It's really, really fun to watch. It's a shame that, as an acting professor at a small college, he was found to be guilty of sexual abuse of 8 of his students.
God, I can't believe I didn't read that. Jesus.
Sorry. So he's totally delightful in this movie, but he's also like a fucking predator. So yeah, that sucks. But
Jesus.
I do like that scene a lot.
Took the wind out of my sails, I'll tell you that right now.
I'm sorry.
He's well directed too. Like Laser, Tevye talks about Laser as stupid, but Tevye is stupid in ways, and Laser is actually, I think, presented in this movie as being smarter than Tevye thinks, and he catches on to stuff a little quicker than Tevye does. Into life, Tevye is much more ready to dance with the Russians, and if you watch Paul Mann, he's a lot more unsettled by the scene that's happening, and you can tell that he sort of sees where this is going more than Tevye does.
Everybody in the bar is hesitant to dance with the Russians, and Tevye will dance with them, and Tevye is so joyful in this scene. For a movie where Topol is playing down the humor, it's really fun to see him just be joyful for once. His curiosity towards the non-Jewish Russian guys who are in the bar, I think it's a great moment of character development and of growth of him.
This is also one of the few moments that's really a carryover of a lot of the Robbins choreography, because Robbins is just so good at showing different groups of people dancing with each other and having a relationship. Think West Side Story. It's great visual storytelling.
I fucking love this song so much. I love the dancing of the Russian guys. The thing where they like kneel down and then like kick their legs out. Like every time watching it growing up, my mom would be like, "Oh my God, my knees hurt just watching it," or some comment like that. But it's such a fun song. The part where like the Russian guy sings his opening note. That note just pierces my soul. It's just so beautiful. I think this song also has a good example of like choices made. So, for example, Laser Wolf, when he sings this part, I really like the choice he makes here.
To life, l'chaim. To Zeitel, my daughter.
My wife.
I feel like this is the second time on this podcast we've referenced the Borat my wife thing. I guess it won't be the last.
Really? Have we? To be clear, I really hate Borat. I don't like that movie. I was forced to watch it on my birthday, and I really didn't want to. Like, I don't want to. I don't even like that movie. Anyways, it's a great song to life.
And such an interesting idea for a song. A father-in-law and a potential son-in-law singing about this relationship. Of course, there's the famous Lin-Manuel Miranda did this with his father-in-law at his wedding, and there's a video of it you could watch on YouTube. It's very cute.
Okay, up next, Miracle of Miracles.
Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, God took the tailor by the hand.
Which is, in my opinion, the worst song in the whole musical. I fucking hate this song. I want to punch Model the tailor in his fucking face during this song. He's way too happy and like self-satisfied. I actually don't like when characters are too self-satisfied, to be honest. I fucking hate this song.
I don't think it's that bad. Like, I get what you mean. Like, obviously, like, it's a dorky song, and it is played for him being dorky. Maybe it could be better if it had a better melody than the kind of Jerry Bach music that he usually writes. The thing that I think is kind of interesting about this song, at least when it was written in 1964, is it's kind of more of like a song that a girl would sing. Just this open-hearted happiness is not the kind of joyful declaration of, I'm so happy we're together, that you would see from a male character in shows at the time. I like how different all the romances with the different people are, and I don't know, you don't like a couple of dorks being together?
I just don't like the character of Model. I'm sorry, I don't. But what do you think about the actor, Leonard Fry? He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this role. Because I hate the character so much, I don't particularly enjoy the performance, but I don't think it's bad or anything. I just really don't like the character.
I think it's a beautiful performance. I think he's really good in the role. Just his interest in getting this sewing machine is very charming. I do think it's funny that they introduce him, like he's got a tape measure around his neck. Like they just need to really hit it hard that he is a tailor. I think the performance is wonderful. I think he's really, really good. But I do get that he is being annoying. Like that is simply happening. I can't really argue that.
I guess the other thing to say about this song, Miracle on Miracles, you pointed out the little musical introduction to this song that John Williams composed. Let's play a quick little clip.
Yeah, I don't know. It kind of sounds like E.T. Right?
Yeah, it has that John Williams flavor. And you can see John Williams in that example. All right, let's get to a really fun one. Tevye's Dream.
Tevye! What? This about your daughter marrying my husband? Would you do this to your friend and neighbor from Sarah?
Which is a nightmare scene where he comes up with a really elaborate plot to convince his wife Golda to let Seidel and Model get married by acting like Golda's dead grandmother actually wants it to happen, and that if they don't, then Laser Wolf's dead wife will come back from the grave and haunt Seidel. This scene gave me nightmares when I was a child. It genuinely scared the crap out of me. And also, I was also very confused by it because I didn't realize that Tevye was like making this up. Like I didn't realize that it was a plan. I thought he actually had this nightmare scene. Like I was too stupid as a child to get it.
This might be my favorite part of the movie and of the show in a way, other than the opening tradition. This is the kind of sequence that it just takes it to a whole nother level. You did not expect to see a bunch of fucking zombies walking around all of a sudden. And, when you see this in like the show and it's like all of the rest of the cast comes out and they're being creepy, but also kind of funny. Yeah, it's just so beyond what your imagination could have cooked up for what's going to happen. And they do a great job. It's always one of the parts of the piece for a designer who gets to really they get to have a lot of fun with this sequence. They do a lot of really cool German expressionistic kind of makeup on Frumacera. This is the sequence where this is the antithesis of those boring parts of musicals. If you get to this part in the show and from the second that Tevye sits down in bed and he's fluffing his sheets and he doesn't know what to do, and then he gets the idea, and then this whole storyline unspools and it's a completely different genre and it's like scary, but it's like the funniest moment that Tevye gets to have. It's just one of those things where from the moment that he sits down to the end where he's blowing out the candle and laughing with God about how he tricked his wife, there is no movie I would rather be watching ever. Like this is just, I am exactly where I want to be. I'm watching this shit and it's blowing my mind. This might be my favorite part of the show.
I love this song. I love this part of the movie. I want to point out, this is in the original source material. Like this, like Tevye coming up with this plan and pretending to have this dream and the different ghosts in it, that is in the original Sholem Aleichem stories. And so when they were coming up with songs for the musical, I bet they were just like thinking about that part of the stories being like, oh, that's fucking gold. We are going to do something real fun with that.
You should just watch this. If you're not going to watch this movie, just pop this sequence on. And if you don't remember that this is in Fiddler, like if you have a memory of Fiddler, but you haven't watched it since you were a kid, this will make you very interested in rewatching this, even if you're not the kind of person who watches a lot of movie musicals.
Okay, next up, Sunrise, Sunset.
Is this the little girl I carry?
Jewison said that the wedding scene is probably the best lit scene he's ever done. He filmed it at sunset and they had all these candles and it is very pretty. Like I love when they're all walking through the village to get to the wedding. Like I think it's really, really gorgeous. But as I mentioned earlier, because they're singing in their heads throughout it and you're just getting close-ups of the villagers' faces, it's boring to me. It's pretty, but it's boring and it drags.
Yeah, and I guess I just also had this thought that I guess another reason that they're probably having people sing in their heads is because then it makes lip syncing easier. Like, then you don't have to worry about lip syncing which could be kind of a pain in the ass if you're trying to do an elaborate sequence lit by candles and have a bunch of people, and you're also trying to cut between different things. So maybe it's not just a stylistic choice, but also just makes things a little easier, which then, of course, makes me think that it is just shitty. It is just a bad choice. But beautiful song. And a song that, again, this has become such an important song in the tradition of not just Jewish people's weddings, but weddings, that at a certain point, Sheldon Harnick was asked in, like, when did we legalize gay marriage? It was like 2014 or whatever. But when gay marriage was legalized, people petitioned him, can you write an official, like, same-sex couple versions of the song? And he was like, yeah, you're right, I need to do that. And then they were all like, can you write a non-Jewish version? Like, he needed to create versions of this song that could fit in people's weddings because there was such high demand for it as a wedding song.
That's amazing. I didn't know that. It's great. And then it transitions into the wedding celebration / the bottle dance. And this is iconic for two reasons. One is that, like, this is the scene. There's no lyrics at this part. This is just music and dancing. It's really great dancing. And it advances the plot because this is where Perchik wants to dance with Hodel. So typically the men and women don't dance together. And so he wants to do that, and everybody's shocked. But Tevye, because Tevye is just way more open-minded than you expect his character to be, Tevye is like, you know what? I want to dance with my wife. So him and Golda dance together too, and then they pull everybody into it. And it's just a great moment of, you know, traditions changing, barriers breaking down, that kind of thing. Modernization. But then the most iconic part of this is the bottle dance, of course, where they balance bottles on their heads and dance around. And I just always thought that they, like, glued the bottles on their hats. Like, I really thought there's no way that they're actually just doing this for real. But Sam tells me that in all the productions and in the movie, they really do it. They really balance the bottles on their heads.
I mean, again, I'm sure there's some middle school productions where they have had some Velcro perhaps being utilized. But no, you're supposed to not.
Yeah, and when they were filming this, so most of the movie was shot on location in Yugoslavia, but this scene, the weather was really dewy, and they had this fake snow on the ground, and it made it really challenging for the dancers to do it. So this scene is actually filmed in a studio.
It's all fake snow, too, by the way. They couldn't, there was no snow on the ground, so a lot of it is this polystyrene little bits. And the scene at the train station later on, this is a real missed opportunity because it does not look that cold. Like, they just have little bits of snow around.
Yeah, the cinematographer Oswald Morris said that filming Fiddler is every cinematographer's dream because it takes place over the course of 4 seasons. So you get all 4 seasons throughout the movie. But winter, yeah, if they had gotten some actual real thick snow, I think it would have added a bit to the changing of the seasons. Okay, Sam, I have a really important question.
Uh-huh.
Do you love me?
Do I what?
I think the song is really cute, but also, like, it's so funny. It's funny. But it's weird that, like, they don't say that many loving things about each other. They're like, well, I've been with you for so long. If that's love, then yeah, I love you. But they don't actually say loving things. It's so sweet, though, despite that. Like, it's just weird that it's so sweet and lovely, despite the fact that they're not actually being that loving towards each other. But it just feels real.
Well, and what's sweet about it is it's not just that Tevye has been feeling all of these feelings of love for Golda the whole time, and he desperately needs to know if she feels them too. It's like neither one of us has ever thought about this, like, in any serious way, like, until the prospect of Hodel marrying Perchik for love comes up. He's like, oh, I guess we might be in love too? Is that what this is? And Sheldon Harnick, I don't remember what made him want to write this song. There was maybe one of those situations where, like, we're missing a song, we need something else. Golda has kind of little to do in the show in a way. So then Sheldon Harnick wrote this song, and the first time he saw it performed, he left the theater and started crying, and he didn't know why he had been crying, and it was because he'd inadvertently written the relationship that he'd wished his own parents had had.
It's funny to wish that your parents had a relationship where they're in an arranged marriage and it takes them years to realize they love each other. Like, wouldn't you rather have them love each other from the beginning?
Well, the idea is that I think he thinks they didn't love each other.
Yeah. This song made me think about arranged marriages in a different light growing up. I think that everybody should marry for love, but it made me a little less prejudiced against cultures that have arranged marriages. So I was like, that's sweet that they have something that looks like love eventually.
Exactly what they were going for, I'm sure.
This is a great little song. It's short, but it's great. Yeah, it's a perfect blend of, like, humor, but, like, heartbreak, but also sweetness. It's really lovely. And it's performed wonderfully by Topol and by Norma Crane, who plays Golda in the movie.
Originally for Golda, they wanted Anne Bancroft in the role. And they didn't get her, but I gotta say, they got an actress who looks an awful lot like her and kind of has a very similar vibe. So they got what they needed some way or another.
All right, next, this is Hoddle's goodbye scene. Far from the home I love.
How can I hope to make you understand why I do what I do? Why I must travel to a distant land, far from the home I love.
You know, Hoddle to me, she's the only daughter who gets a solo song. And it's kind of a famous song. It's one of those moments that to me has always kind of sat in the middle between a moment that is disposable in the show versus is really impactful, which I think a lot of girls want, like, they dream of playing Hoddle because they want to sing Far From the Home I Love. And I don't know. The antithesis of a song that goes from one place and lands in another place at the end of it. Almost nothing is said in this song. Like, it's a lot of musical theater songs start from a title, right? This is the central idea. And yes, she will be far from the home that she loves. I guess I knew that she loved this home. She will be far from it. How can I make you understand that I'm going to do this thing that I'm not going to like? She's not saying anything.
This is about a moment where a daughter decides to leave behind her village, go to Siberia to meet up with the guy she loves and have a life with him there while he's imprisoned in Siberia. She's probably never going to see her family again. And that is understood. The family all knows this is probably the last time they're seeing her. It's not like nowadays where your child moves away and you call each other and stuff. Maybe like they'll write to each other, but that's it. In the Shalom Aleichem stories, this part made me cry. It's like, made me cry just thinking about it. It's like really touching. And so having this song be so lame in the musical and movie is like such a letdown because it could be extremely emotional. And they were going for emotional. It didn't work. And I think it's the song, like you said. They're just not giving enough there for that goodbye sequence.
There's also the weird thing that it's like there's 3 daughters and they're supposed to be descending into harder and harder decisions. So this moment, because it's also like the only moment that a daughter gets a song like this, and it's a sad song, like it's an unusually sad song for the show, this should be a big emotional moment, but it also can't be a bigger moment than the Chava sequence later, you know? So
I think it could have been bigger than the Chava sequence. Well, let's just move on to the Chava. The little bird, little Chavala.
Little bird, little Chavale, I don't understand what's happening today.
This song's also very meh for me. It's boring.
every time I hear it, I always assume that this was written for the movie. Like, this just has written for the movie vibes, but it's not. I think it's in the original, although it was left off of the cast recording in my memory.
This song is about Chava decides to run off and marry a non-Jew. And each time Tevye's daughters want to do something that goes against his wishes, he's convinced, you know what, I'm going to support my daughters in this. But this is an example where he just can't support that.
It's the best part of the show, kind of. Or I keep saying everything's the best part, but this is like one of the best fucking parts. When he's having these little moments of trying to figure out whether he wants to let the daughter do this, he goes, on the other hand, this, and on the other hand, this, on the other hand, and in this, he's like, on the other hand, can I really turn my back against my faith? And then he's like, on the other hand, no, there is no other hand. There's no fucking other hand. Like, get away from me. No. And it's powerful. And you feel for this father in a way where it's like, this is a monstrous thing to disown your daughter from marrying outside the faith. But he has been through a lot with these girls. Like, they have put him through the ringer. And some things you can't just, he's not going to be a doormat for the rest. You know, it's like, it's not like I think he's doing the right thing, but it doesn't make me hate him, as I said before.
It's such a great example of giving your character flaws, but still allowing them to be beloved. He's just not giving in to this. But, you know, in the movie and in the musical, and in the very end, he forgives her. At the end, during Anatevka, when they're all leaving, like, he forgives her. In the original source material, before that final chapter was added, Tevye never forgives her. Like, this is the one thing he cannot forgive. And it's not until he wrote the final chapter at the end, like when Sholem Aleichem wrote the final chapter a few years later, where he did have Tevye finally forgive her, but it was at the very end of Tevye's life, like years later. So in the original stories, Tevye does not forgive her for many, many years. And in the original stories, the Hava story of her going against him, that short story is a bit more of a power play between the priest in the village and Tevye. So it's more about those two men fighting over the soul of Hava than it is about Tevye's relationship with Hava. But it is such a great part of the plot that Tevye has that one thing that crosses the line for him. Makes him a more rich character. But the song doesn't do any of that justice, in my opinion.
But I actually kind of think this is one of the prettier visual sequences when they have the three girls dancing in silhouette against the sunlit sky. They each dance off with their one suitor, and then you see Hava in the end left alone, and she falls into the arms. Very good visual storytelling, and it gives you the sense that Tevye's not going to do what he does. But so I don't know, it sets it up well.
Yeah, it's pretty. But again, it's a meh song for me. But then it ends with Anatevka. And I think this song is really haunting and beautiful. And it's a great ending.
Yeah, just the whole essence, and it's trying to get at this Jewish cynicism, acceptance of persecution, where they get kicked out of their town. The whole thing has been like, why do we stay? Why do we stay here if it's so dangerous? It's because Anatevka's our home. And so then they're like, okay, you guys have to vacate your homes. They have to sell their homes. And so they're kicked out, and so all of them just look around and they're like, well, I mean, this place sucks, though. Who cares? It's just Anatevka. I got like a fucking chair and pot. This is just shit. I don't care. But they do care.
Yeah, but it's so great because it really just undercuts everything. And like Pauline Kael said, this movie is not particularly sensitive or delicate, just straight up states its themes and everything. But in this song, it's a good example of it undercutting those themes so that it's not too sickly sweet. It's not overly sentimental.
Subtext is what musical theater is all about at its best. Anatevka is perhaps the best example of subtext in the writing of Fiddler.
All right, we just went through the whole movie song by song. You want to wrap it up by talking about the New Hollywood context? Like, how does this movie fit in the world of New Hollywood?
I think we kind of had the right idea with how to make movie musicals. I think you don't need an auteur, frankly. I think Jewison's lack of vision and just wanting to serve the piece works very well in this because the piece is so strong. We've gotten to this place now because of like the freneticness of cutting and editing and choreography that we associate with more modern movie musicals. Perhaps a lot of this I would lay at the feet of Bob Fosse and just sort of what we come to expect from a movie musical. It's got to be very visually exciting. I think that this has kind of put a lot of movie musical adaptations in a bit of an impossible position. Musicals aren't really exciting in that way, in my opinion. The best musicals are about the writing, they're about the scenes, they're about telling the story. And when you make it too much about incredibly strong visual flair and they've a lot of cuts and, they just have to feel vital because musicals don't feel vital. So we've got to amp up that. I think like this is how movie musicals should essentially be. As Pauline Kael said, like, I think this might be the perfect example of a filmed musical. And it's a little bit no frills, but at the same time, Jewison's making very strong choices, stalking in front of the camera, needing to, he used Hitchcock's set designer, Robert Boyle, who's the production designer. They really were just focusing on trying to have a really complete sense of where everything is in Anatevka, which is very kind of a Hitchcock thing if you think about like Rear Window or something, like just really good at knowing where everything is supposed to be. This is an attempt at making a grittier version of a movie musical than the late 60s failure shows that we think of, like Smile or Hello Dolly or even How to Succeed, which I think is a great movie. We'll maybe talk about someday. But an attempt this was bringing musical theater into a more modern context. And I think like we had the model. Like this was what we should be trying to recreate this kind of thing. But I don't know, maybe it was just a right place, right time. Jewison's history and variety shows perhaps helped in some ways. I don't know, but the approach of having this non-auteur who really understands musical theater was right as far as making a functioning version of the stage show that did not feel stage-bound, but that did not feel like it was trying to add a lot of pizzazz.
But it's taking a musical, but giving it a bit more of a New Hollywood style. Like we mentioned, the grittiness, It was shot on location, gave it a realistic look. All the actors, they look like real people. They do not look like classical movie stars at all. So it has that real person vibe, the way that new other Hollywood movies is. So it doesn't really feel very New Hollywood overall.
But as I was saying, I think it feels less dated than a lot of New Hollywood movies in a weird way.
Yes, I agree. So it took some New Hollywood aspects, blended it with the musical, and achieved ultimately a modern thing, despite the fact that it's telling the story of communities from like the late 1800s. Just a kind of crazy mix of time periods and influences. So for Cold Stone ratings, Sam, do you want to introduce the Cold Stone rating?
Yeah, the Cold Stone rating is a rating where we rate things based on the sizes that Cold Stone Creamery uses, where, like, we say like it, love it, or gotta have it. But that's only if we like the movie. If we don't like the movie, we say it doesn't make the scale, or we say, I sampled that ice cream, and let me tell you, I wouldn't even feed it to my worst enemy, or I maybe would feed it to my cousin who I sort of a bit of a frenemies thing with. Anyways, this is getting stupid in the metaphor. The point is, like it, love it, or gotta have it. I assume you at least like Fiddler. You already told me what your rating was, so it's a gotta have it. So now you want to say it officially that it's a gotta have it.
Yeah, it's a gotta have it. I already said it, but I'll say it again. It's a gotta have it. I actually forgot how much I love this movie. And so then doing this episode reminded me, oh yeah, I fucking love this movie. And I think it's a movie that people forget about because it's just so its own unique, specific thing in the world of movies. I feel like it's a little underrated at this point, which is kind of a weird thing to say. But I think it's absolutely gotta have it for me.
Yeah, underrated is kind of an interesting thing. As we brought up, like Fiddler is this weird thing where it's like it's a classic musical, but people just view musicals as being, they don't really have a good sense of what musicals are actually like. Like they just sort of vaguely remember either I liked it because I was a little kid, or I always found it really annoying even when I was a little kid. Yeah, it's a gotta have it for me. The movie's amazing. I felt like I was being a little bit critical, seeming at the beginning of this episode, talking about all the differences in the movie versus the show. But that's more just me kind of looking for something interesting to say and to talk about stuff that I happen to have noticed about it. But all of the choices are great. It's a long movie. It's got little moments that are maybe a little bit, I don't know, boring would be the word, but it essentially is a perfect movie despite that. So gotta have it. Everybody should watch it over and over and over again. Watch it multiple times a month, I think. I guess one last thing though. This episode is different than the ones that we've had in the past because we actually can appeal to the fact that we have real authority. At least one of us has some real authority on something in this world. You should listen to this podcast because one of us is a literal fucking doctor. As of this episode, we now have a doctor on the show, and her name is Elena Gibson. It took us a long time to get here. It took Elena a certain amount of time to get her PhD. But, yeah, we've got a fucking doctor. So, congratulations, Elena.
Okay, for context, I've been in a PhD program for the past 7.5 years, and I just successfully defended. So I have just earned my doctorate in biology. I study molecular neuroscience. And if I seem more relaxed this episode, it's because I am. Okay, I'm chilling. Everything is good now. My life, every problem is fixed now that I'm done with this stressful experience. Just kidding. It's hilarious that you introduced that by trying to appeal to authority, as if me being a doctor has anything to do with Fiddler, when clearly you're the one with way more authority about this episode, given how much you know about musical theater. So anyways, thanks for a shout out, Sam. Appreciate it. That concludes another exciting New Hollywood adventure. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Kill Your Idols on the podcatcher of your choice. Please take the time to leave a rating or review. It is extremely helpful for small podcasts like ours. We'd love to hear from you, so please reach out to us on Instagram, X, or send us an email to killyouриdols@gmail.com. We want to say thank you to the Illuminator for our logo, and thank you to ourselves for everything else. Please join us next episode where we will be discussing one of the 2 films William Friedkin made chronicling gay life in the 70s, The Boys in the Band, which we thought would be a cheeky pick because it also stars Leonard Fry, who played Model in Fiddler. So we're going to get
Double order of fries.
That's right.
Hey, Peter Fonda, how did we do?
We blew it.